Just give me a minute, guys. I'm just sharing the link with other members of the group. Okay, guys. So let's see this game. This is between Kagwa Master from the Chess Blasters and BCC boys from BCC. And let's just check who all are watching. Yeah, so we have the viewers right with us right now. Let's go into the full screen mode and e4, knight f6, e5, knight to d5, pawn to c4, knight to b6, pawn to d4, pawn to d6, pawn takes d6, c takes d6, pawn to d5, pawn to g6, knight to c3, bishop to g7, knight to f3, castles, bishop to e2, rook to e8. Now the idea behind rook to e8 is to avoid getting exchange of this bishop. So bishop will come to h6. So first, sorry, bishop will come to e3 first, then queen to d2, and bishop will try to go to h6. Whenever this bishop will go to h6, this bishop can be played to h8, and this bishop cannot capture the rook on f8. That is the idea behind playing rook e8 here. You can use this idea in your game as well. Okay, so next we have castles, knight to d7, bishop to g5, knight to f6, pawn to a4. Idea is pawn to a5, so black himself play 8 pawn to a5, not allowing space to white on the queen side. And then we have rook to b1. I'm not sure what is the idea of rook to b1, b4 might be the idea, but it doesn't seem to be effective right away. Pawn to h3, bishop g4, pawn h3, bishop takes f3, pawn takes f3. The reason is now the c4 pawn is hanging here. Okay, so if c4 pawn, if bishop captures the bishop on f3, then knight can capture c4. So it's a choice between destroying your pawn structure on the king side as the versus giving away the pawn on c4. Okay, so white has decided to give away the pawn structure rather than giving the pawn on c4. So rook to c8, pawn to b3, and I think knight can be okay. So knight d7 is played, knight to b5, pawn h6, bishop h4, knight to h7, bishop to d3, knight to e5, bishop to c2, queen to d7. Now the h3 pawn is hanging here. Bishop can h3, bishop takes h3 can be played, and then we have pawn to king to g2, bishop to f6, bishop to g3, knight to knight to g5. Now h3 pawn is under attack twice by the queen as well as this knight. So probably rook h1 was played. Yes, rook h1 was played. Knight takes f3, bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, and queen to d2. Now attacking the h6 pawn here, but I think bishop g5 is not possible because of f4. So pawn to g5 and bishop to e4. Okay, still strange idea why bishop e4 is played. I'm not sure why. So bishop g7, queen to c2, rook to f8, bishop check, king to h8, bishop to f5, pawn to e6, pawn takes, and now bishop comes back to g4, queen check on c6, rook to so king to g1, and knight takes g4, pawn takes g4, queen to f3. Now this g4 pawn is hanging as well as this rook is having a beautiful attack on the f file. So knight takes d6, queen g4 check, king f1, and now queen f3 attacking the rook on h1, and then knight takes c8, queen takes h1, king to e2, queen f3 check, king e1, and rook takes c8 here. So rook to d1, rook to f8 again, putting the pressure on f2. So black has won this game, but let's check What happened in the game? Knight takes c8 was played, queen check, king to e2, queen f3 check, king to e1, rook takes c8, rook d1, rook to f8, rook to d3, and queen check, king moves to e2, and queen to g2, king to e1. So white is in a difficult position now, and I think, yeah, this is the winning move for black now. So this is the game over for white. Okay, so let's go back to tournament and check the, as there is a request from hidden master, that is Saksham. We'll check his game. Hidden chess master. Okay, hidden chess master. You should have kept playing actually just two games here. So let's check the first game. Okay, so e4. I think we have opened. Okay, this is an analysis mode. Let me switch off the engine. Don't want any ideas here from the engine. Let's try to find out the manual moves. E4, c5, knight f3. So this game was between Ronak Mistry from the team names are not given. Hidden Chess Master is from Khelo Chess India. So knight e4 c5, knight f3 d6, pawn to d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, pawn to a6. This is called as the Sicilian Najdorf variation. Then bishop to g5, pawn to e6, pawn to f4, bishop to e7, queen to d2, pawn to d5, pawn to b5, pawn to a3, bishop b7, and bishop to d3. Knight c6. I think this here in this variation, knight should go to d7 and come to b6, and then probably to c4 or try to play d5 with the support of knight on b6 square. But anyways, knight c6 was played. Knight takes c6, bishop takes c6, and castles. So this is going to be an exciting battle, guys. It's actually an opposite side castling. So always there are going to be a lot of fireworks in the game. Knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, and king to b1, pawn to a5. I think black is going to hit the king first. Yes, black hit the king first, but the pawns were not able. So black was not able to exchange the pawns here. So instead of b4 here, I think pawn to a4 could have been played first. Bishop takes b5, and then rook b8 can be played, or this rook can be played to b8. If bishop comes back, then you can capture the pawn with the queen. Okay, so pawn to b5, pawn to a4, pawn to c4, bishop goes to c6, and e4 pawn is now hanging, but rook f1, white doesn't care about the a4 pawn. He puts the rook on f1, rook to f4, queen to g5, pawn to h4, queen to h5. Now the d1 rook is hanging, so rook to h1, and bishop comes back to c6 now, pawn to g4, queen to h6, pawn to g5, queen to h5, a very good attack on the king side. And uh, okay, so there is no square left for the queen. The queen can go to g6 now, actually, bishop to d3 and pawn to f5. So here black had chance to just repeat the moves, again put the queen to h5 and try to repeat the moves, but he went for a difficult or the weaker option of playing pawn to f5, because after n pass this queen cannot be saved. So n pass was a blunder actually. So playing pawn to f5 was a blunder here actually. That should not have been played. Or else there was one option which was a difficult option, where this in this position black could have captured the queen here, the bishop. Queen takes bishop, bishop takes a1, and try to play with two rooks and bishop versus queen and rook on f4. That could have been an option for black, but it was easy to just repeat the moves, queen h5 and queen g6. It would have been a draw for black probably. So black went for the blunder. He played f5, he takes f6, queen to e8, and then rook to f1, pawn to g6, pawn to f7 is winning for white now. So nice game again. Just a quick check and wait. Let's go back to tournament and check the next game. So we have next game between, let's check this game. This is between Gujarat Lions and Team Future. Knightly King is from Gujarat Lions. We have Mahinthan, Mahinthan from Team Future. And what happened in the game? Let's check. It was a knight f3, knight c6, pawn to g3, pawn to d5, bishop g2, pawn to e5, pawn to d4, pawn to e4, knight to g1, bishop d6, pawn to e3, knight e7, pawn to c5. So it looks like a reversed French defense, advanced variation of French defense with a fianchetto on the king side. So pawn takes, bishop takes e4, castles, knight to e2, pawn to f5, bishop to g2, knight to g6, queen to c2, bishop to e6, and I think pawn d4 is not losing because of knight b4, queen takes c4. Even I think bishop b4 check was possible here. So bishop takes d5, no, not bishop takes d5, bishop b4 check first. Any move and then bishop takes d5 can be played. So that would just get this free pawn for black. So knight b4, queen takes c4, and bishop f7, castles, knight to e5, queen to b3, and pawn to a5, pawn to a3, pawn to a4, queen goes back, and knight to d3 now. Nicely setting up his knights on d3 and e5 here. Black is having good position. Pawn to f4, knight to c8, pawn to e5, knight to e2 check, king takes e2, pawn takes, bishop takes e5, and knight c3. So very nice combination, guys, coming to a good end. So bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and bishop takes d5. Extra pawn for now. Black here, black is pawn up, and he should be able to put some pressure on this. I think that bishop is gone now. Yep, black was pawn up on d5, but this bishop got pinned immediately by this move. So that's the reason why. So rook d1, bishop takes d5, rook d1, f4 was possible here to play, pawn to f4. I'm not sure. There was one chance. No, there is no chance. Okay, so let's go back. Pawn to c6, pawn to c4, queen e7, pawn takes d5, pawn takes d5, rook bishop takes d5, king h8, and pawn to e4, rook to e8, rook to d4, queen to c5, pinning the rook on d4. So queen e3, and now pawn takes pawn, bishop takes b7, rook takes rook, king takes rook, and rook f8 check, king to g2, queen c2 check, rook d2, and queen to c1. Okay, so queen c1 here actually was threatening the mate. It was a long game actually. So queen c1, yeah. So queen c1 was threatening. So it was a long game. Let's just fast forward it and get to the end because white is already piece up. White is having a lot of advantage here. Yeah, so there is a mate threat on f8 now. And now queen will come back to g7. Check. Queen moves, bishop e4 check, queen takes, rook takes, and yep, that's a win for white. Yeah, let's go back to tournament. So we have last few minutes remaining from the tournament, just 10 minutes remaining now. So let's check one of the games that is going on between Wild Frog and Pasindu. Wild Frog is again a good player from Chess Blasters. c4, c6, and c3, d5, pawn takes d5, pawn takes d5, pawn to d4, knight to c6, knight to f3, knight to f6, bishop g5, bishop f5, bishop takes f6, e takes f6, and pawn to e3. So black has this weak pawn on d5 square. So if this bishop is able to come to b5, a4, and b3, it will be able to put some pressure on this d5 pawn. Pawn a3, bishop takes c3, b takes c3, queen to a5, queen to d2, castles, bishop d3, bishop takes, queen takes, and rook to c8. Now this is a backward pawn. Backward pawn is a pawn which does not have any support from any other pawns. And actually knight a5 and knight c4 could have been a good move, or at least knight a5 then rook to c5, and this rook can come to c8, put pressure on this c3 pawn. So castles, knight to e7, rook to c1, rook to c4. That's correct. Put the rook on c4, don't allow this pawn to push. Put the other rook on c8 and just try to bring this knight to some attacking square like this b5 from where it can attack the c3 pawn. So, or even it can come to d6 to guard these two squares of c4 and e4. So knight to d2, rook goes back, and pawn to e4, rook to c3, to c8, sorry, not c3, knight b3, rook takes c3, rook takes c3, queen takes c3, queen takes, rook takes, and knight to c5. Pawn to b6, knight to a4, rook to c4. And I think this is lost for white now. He is going to get lot of pawns. I was just wondering if this back rank can be used in some way. So just keeping few moves back here. So rook takes c3, queen takes c3, and yeah, queen takes c3 was forced, rook takes c3. I was wondering if we could play this rook c1 move. Let's quickly get to the position that we were in. So I was just wondering if we could play this rook c1 move. If queen takes d3, then I was thinking of this mate, but this knight is supporting the c8. So queen to c3, rook to c3, knight to c5, pawn to b6, knight to a4, rook to c4, and now knight to b2, rook takes d4, pawn takes, knight takes, and pawn to g3, king to f8, rook to c1, now king e7, knight d1, pawn to f5, king to gf1, pawn to f4, pawn takes f4, knight takes f4, knight to e3, and I think that's a blunder actually, because now knight f5 is winning for white simple check, and this fork, and the knight is rook is gone. That's what I think white missed here, white frog missed here, white frog had a win here actually. So that's a missed win from white frog. And then we have king to e2, rook to a4, rook to c3, knight to d4 check, king to d3, knight to b5, rook to c4, rook takes a3 check, king to e4, and this is the way now white lost his rook. And after that, this is an easy win for black. Now look at these passes over here. So just a moment where white missed a win was this position. Uh, yep, this pawn. So here white to play. It's a simple move, knight f5 and capture the rook, which was missed by white frog. Okay, so a point lost by chess blasters, or else this points are very critical, guys, to make your team, to help your team win actually. So look at this. That 1 point which White Frog would have got, it would have put the chess blasters on the first position. Right now they are on second position. So let's check next game here. Let's scroll down and check one game from the lower boards. So let's check this game, Shades and Timut. So in the opening, an f3 was played, knight f3, pawn to d5, pawn to d4, pawn to e6, pawn to g3, bishop to d6, bishop to g2, pawn to c6, castles, pawn to f5, bishop to g5, knight to f6, pawn to e3, knight to d7, rook, knight to e5, knight takes. So why would white give away his pawn on this pawn? Actually, this is not a good way to play. Actually, not should not give away this pawn for free. So this pawn is simple. You're simply playing pawn down here and just hoping for black to make a mistake. That's not how the game should be played. You should be playing strong here. You might play c4, knight c3, attack on the black center as much as possible. And if this pawn takes is played, then you can play a3, b4, b5 to attack on the queen side and weaken this pawn on c6, and it would be then the backward pawn on c6. You can put your rook on c1, this knight can go to a4 and then to c5. So this would have been the backward pawn. That would have been the plan, which is a better plan rather than this giving away a free pawn in the center that would put actually white on the back foot right away. So castles, knight to d2, queen to e8, bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, pawn to c4, queen to e7, pawn takes, rook to b1. That is the correct idea now, just to support the pawn and push it as much as possible and try to create some weakness on the black's queen side. Bishop to e6, knight to f3, bishop to f7, knight rook to e1, bishop h5, queen to queen to c2, queen to e4, queen takes, pawn takes, and I think this should be easy win for black now. Yep, this should be an easy win for black, just because white gave away that pawn for free in the opening. It has put this white's position into a huge question mark. It's a bad position for white. Let's fast forward quickly to check what's the final position. This is a live position, guys, and I think this black should win this one. He just has to get this one rook exchange. Yes, rook exchange, and now black should have a better position. Yep. Yes, and the h5 pawn is now going to fall, and thereafter black can win easily. Yep. So let's go back to the tournament, guys, and check the next game. Okay, so next game is between. Let's check this game. Let's quickly check what happened in the opening. D4, D5, knight F3, knight F6, bishop to F4, bishop to G4, and now knight to E5, bishop to H5, knight to C3, pawn to E6, pawn to G3, bishop to B4, bishop G2, knight to C6, knight takes C6, pawn takes C6, pawn to A3, bishop takes C3, B takes C3, and castles, knight to E4, and now supporting the pawn on C3 with this queen on E1. This support is there. So pawn to F5, pawn to F3, pawn knight to D6, and pawn to E4. Pawn takes, bishop takes, knight takes, and queen to D5. So black is offering a queen exchange here. So if you look at the black's position, these two are the double pawns. This is a pawn which does not have any pawn support. This is a backward pawn again, an isolated king pawn which has no support. And then these two pawns are okay. White's pawns are fine, they are supporting each other. This is okay, but this is not so good. The double pawns here, and the pawn on a3 is again an isolated pawn. No one is supporting that pawn. So e6 is actually the target in this game for white. If white wants to play and win here, he just has to play in such a way that this e6 can be a target in the long run. So rook to e1 was played, bishop to e4, and rook queen to e6, queen takes e6, rook takes e6. So black is just giving away all his pawns out there. Sorry, I think something happened here. Yeah. So black is just giving away all his pawns. Live position currently. I'm just trying to find out where we. Yeah. So black is just giving away all his pawns. That's the position where we were, and then something just snapped, and yeah, we are looking from the black's point of view. Yeah, rook c6, rook to c8, rook to c1, bishop to a4, rook takes c7, rook takes c7, bishop takes c7, and rook to c8, bishop comes back to e5. Beautiful passes in the center. And if white is able to hold on to these two passes, then white should be able to win this one. And rook to f2. I think rook f4 was better here actually. There was a threat of this bishop f6 check, king moves, and rook takes c4. So just a small threat here, small tactic. Bishop to f5 was played, pawn to h3, bishop takes h3, rook to h2, bishop to f5, and rook takes h7, king to d6, and rook to a4. This a7. This pawn cannot be captured because the rook is supporting the pawn. So g4 is something that white should have tried to play. King takes d5, rook check, king to e6, and king to f4, bishop to c2, and rook to e6 check, king to f7, and rook check, king to e7, rook to a6, and bishop d3. So it's a opposite color bishop ending. Let's quickly fast forward and check what's the current situation now. This is a live position, guys. So this is in an interesting ending actually, wherein the opposite bishops are present on the board, opposite color bishops, and they have to make sure that. So in the opposite color bishop ending, always remember the player, the bishop which has the attack on the king, always tries to win here. So now this, yeah, this is the position. So king can go to c5 now, rook c8 check again, bishop d4 check can be played now probably. Yep, bishop e5 check. Sorry, not d4. And rook takes G6 can be. Oh, there is a mate threat on H7, A7 now, and I think it's unstoppable. Yeah, it's an unstoppable checkmate on E7. Look at the way this king is trapped now. This king is beautifully trapped right now. So Kharagpur, sorry to if I've taken your name wrong. So yeah, checkmate, fight wins here. Let's go back to tournament, and that's the final standing, guys. RCC has won with 109 points. Pasindu from RCC has scored 36 and leading from his team. So it's a very good score from Pasindu. Then we have Chess Blasters on second position. Dr. D Scientist on 30 points and teams is 109. So top position is actually tied up, but according to the algorithms of LiChess, RCCA is the first team and Chess Blasters is second. Look at this competition, guys. A very close call here. 109, 109, and just by mere some margin, some buckholes or some system or some algorithm, the Chess Blasters have come on the second position. But remember that game from Wild Frog. If he would have given that knight fork and captured the rook on f5, then the Wild Frog would have got those two extra points and Chess Blasters could have been on number one. Khelo Chess India, a very good performance today. Nilambo 129. Thanks Nilambo for playing for my team and scoring 29 points. Then we have Modern Tal on second position in Khelo Chess India. Then we have My Shakti on third. We have sorry, the fourth player is Sodem Blitz, and we have largest school chess. So then we have BCC on 89, play good moves, 22 points. Gujarat Lions, Parik Hari Krishna, the captain of the team, on 25, leading the team from front, and they have finished on fifth place with 80 points. Then we have Team Future, M4M 85749 is on 18 points, leading from Team Future, and total is 69. Golden Castle Chess Club on 20 points. RML India on RML Linda on 20 points, leading from Golden Castle Chess Club, and they have finished on 52. Rays on 22 and Jamshedpur team no participants today. So we'll have to check with this team why they did not play. Tomorrow we may have to check with them again. So that's all from the commentary, guys. Like the video, share with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Join our WhatsApp group. Description box there is a link to join our WhatsApp group. You can go in the description box and click on that link to join the WhatsApp group, and every day we meet at 9:30. Tomorrow there is going to be a difference. The tournament is going to start at 9 p.m. because we have another tournament at 10 p.m. that is a multi-nations cup. Hence this Kilo Chess India tomorrow will be starting at 9 p.m. instead of 9:30 p.m. So that's all from the Khelo Chess India today's live broadcast. Thanks for watching us. Bye bye and good night until we meet tomorrow at the same time.